Greetings and welcome to the beginning of an informal and probably rather inconsistent series on gaming thoughts. That is, my thoughts with regards to certain games, upcoming, past, present, and so on and so forth. Like some people, but unlike many, I'm the kind of gamer who really kind of focuses only on a few titles. I don't obsessively play everything. I don't have the time for it. And I reckon it's a lot to do with my age, perhaps. I game with all kinds of people of all kinds of ages, but they tend to be a lot younger than I am. And I see the tendency in them to just play lots and lots of different kinds of games, which is, perfectly respectable, but it's not my style. So having said that, I'd like to talk about Dragon Age Inquisition. Now, many of you might have played the original Dragon Age, so let me just go a bit into that and Dragon Age 2. Dragon Age Origins was just a fantastic, epic fantasy role-playing game by Bioware. Did it have its flaws? Of course. Every game has its flaws. But it was very, very good overall. The combat was a bit slow and clunky, and that led to some rather, in my assessment, incorrect decisions on the part of BioWare later on, which I'll get into in Dragon Age 2. But it just had, the grit. The decisions were weighty. The dialogue was well done, and it really just sort of sucked you in. And on top of that, there was the equivalent of a creation kit. You could basically mod the game. And in fact, I lent my voice to a amateur mod. It was a big mod actually back then. It was probably 2010 or 9. And so I actually participated as a voice actor in one of those mods for Dragon Age Origins. But you see, it was a really, really good game. Now, when you have a game that good, and it did have its flaws, where do you go from there? Well, of course, the developers look at what the flaws are. They listen to it, listen to the people, and then they say, well, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. But in theory, when you have a game like that, which received almost unanimously 9, on a scale of 10, 9 plus reviews, and as a 9 point something, you're almost at the peak of the mountain. You can only really fall down, in theory at least. I mean, could you ascend even further? I suppose you could grow wings and fly, but so it was a really, really good game. And I want to spend the majority of this time talking about Dragon Age Inquisition, but I needed to give some background. And along came Dragon Age 2. Dragon Age 2, compared to Dragon Age Origins, I think is a safe assessment to say it was on par with canine fecal matter. I mean, if you want to rank fecal matter, I suppose somewhere between horse shit and dog shit. It was just awful. For one thing, yes, the combat was admittedly a bit slow in Dragon Age Origins, so what did they do? They hyped it up. They turned it into a cartoon fest, and this is one of my coming criticisms of the coming title, Dragon Age Inquisition. Just ridiculous combat mechanics, super fast, super unrealistic. And of course, many people complained, and I think it's justified, and the enemies would literally drop out of the air, out of thin air, or from roofs, and all in all, terrible combat system. Not really in keeping with old school role-playing fantasy, which, I remind you, doesn't have to be the case. You don't always have to just do it like it's always been. I'm not a traditionalist, inside joke, in that respect, but the combat was a failure. The story was really poorly done. Look, I don't bother with romances, obviously, in games, but every character was bisexual, which was kind of just weird. Now, I have absolutely nothing wrong with gay, straight, bisexual, whatever. I'm just indifferent to it all. But every character being bisexual, just weird. It just seemed rushed. I mean, it was rushed. I think Dragon Age Origins had a development time of approximately 5 years, and Dragon Age 2 was a year and a half, two. You really saw it. And then, just so you had the poor game mechanics and combat. The story was pretty mediocre. You had these areas which all looked very cartoony, and just repetition. You would see one cave look like the other, look like the other, look like the other, look like the other, and so on and so forth. Okay. Massive failure. I have no idea if EA still got profit for it overall, or profited overall on balance, on aggregate, but I don't know. The thing is, the question there, as was the question with Mass Effect 3, the abomination we call single player. And yes, I'm one of the few people that thought not just the ending sucked, but the entire single player campaign was mediocre at best. But that's another story for another time, and another pair of thoughts for another time. Or several thoughts, more than just one pair, several pairs. So, yeah. I don't know if EA rushed them or not. It doesn't really matter. It turned out to just be just giant crap. It was terrible. Terrible. So, they retreated tactically. And now they've been developing for 3+ years. It'll be 4 about by the time it comes out. The next title in the Dragon Age series. I mean, they weren't just going to give up on it, which I find is laudable. And that is Dragon Age Inquisition. Totally new area, which I'll talk about in a bit. Totally new story. And it actually looks very promising. But looks can be deceiving. For one thing, it's going to be using the Frostbite engine, which is Frostbite 3, which is a significantly upgraded engine that allow them to do all kinds of things, such as environment destructibility and things of that nature. And I'm going to need a lot better rig for that. So pray to the gods that somehow I'm still alive and have the money to afford one, because I plan on playing that game extensively. I'm probably going to do a blind LP the minute it comes out, and do build guides, at least, and this is all a year from now approximately. So, I mean, this is just all theoretical, if I'm still alive, and all that jazz. The point being that it looks very promising. They've explained things. Now, before I talk about what looks promising, let me talk about what doesn't look very promising. Well, I thought, obviously it might be wishful thinking to think that Bioware learned all the lessons that were given to them after publishing the giant piece of fecal matter, otherwise known as Dragon Age Origins. Well, Dragon Age 2 Origins was a masterpiece, my bad. But, the problem is, I see some repetition here. They did show, as you can see, some of the combat, and it's a bit too flashy again. It's unrealistic. I mean, you have the speed. It's almost cartoonish. I hope they can catch that before it's released. If not, it's not the end of the world, as long as the other stuff is okay. One design flaw is okay. Dozens, like had been present in Dragon Age 2, that's of course not okay, not acceptable. So far, that's kind of the flaw I can see in the game. There are probably going to be many others, but once again, you have your companions. You have Varric, the dwarf from Dragon Age 2, who is a likable character. You have Cassandra, who, if you don't know, she was a member of the Inquisition, and now she's a full-time companion, and some other new human wizard that you see tagging along. And it's back to decisions being really weighty. You play the High Inquisitor of the Inquisition. You have apparently total freedom in the race you choose. You're not bound to being a human anymore. You can be a dwarf, male, female. You can be an elf, male, female. You can be a human, male, female. And best of all, you can be a Kunari, male or female, which is a first. And apparently, I don't know if this is accurate, but they must have really invested resources. Each race will have a unique voice. So if you choose, this is what I've heard, if you choose a male dwarf, he's going to have a different voice to the voice of a human male, and obviously female, but even the case of the Kunari and the elf. So really interesting in that sense. So the dialogue wheel inspired by Mass Effect is back. Many people would have preferred silent dialogue, but this just seems the way of the future. I don't think silent dialogue is coming back unless it's done some indie games, which might be discussed at a later date. But so that looks pretty, overall, pretty impressive. It looks pretty well done. The fact that you have choice again in terms of the races you choose, which will have an impact on your interactions with people. I've heard apparently that if you play Kunari or an elf, you might be the subject of racism or prejudice versus human, so on and so forth. So that's very cool. And I'm always big on combat and tactics. I try to be a tactician, and that's very much back as well. Apparently, there's a destructible environment. You have coordination, sort of the classic stuff. You have tanks, you have DPS monsters, and combinations between the classes to make things work better, to make them more effective against enemies, and so on and so forth. So that overall looks pretty good, I'd say, overall. The combat, apart from the cartoonish, flashy swings and what have you. But one thing that looks really interesting, what they've talked about, is the weightiness of your decisions. There's been a tear in the veil between the Fade and the world. And I don't know if you're familiar with Dragon Age lore, but the Fade is the abode of demons as well as good-natured spirits, or if they want to put it that way, good, evil. And there's been a tear. I won't put you through the torture of having to play Dragon Age 2, but basically Dragon Age 2 was about the sundering between the Magus and the Templars. The Templars going too far and trying to control Magus, which will extend beyond the limits of this discussion, which ends up in a huge conflict, which basically just nearly destroys the city in which it took place. And you, depending on what decision you took there, presumably will have some significant outcome in the coming title. That said, I think a lot of decisions we have made throughout Dragon Age and Dragon Age 2 probably won't be that impactful. I mean, some major ones, no doubt, but I see more minor things. However, the developers have said this is the most expansive title to date, as in there are more areas to, it's not open world, but there are more areas to explore than ever before. And you really have to think about what you're doing, according to Mike Laidlaw, at least. I mean, there's a town under siege by demons. Do you choose to defend the town, sacrifice valuable supplies, or do you press on with your major goal of defending the fortress and reinforcing it and making it usable as a point of a strategic point? Well, these are the kind of decisions you have to make, which you really never had to make before in Dragon Age. So I find that quite interesting, and it sounds promising, because when you make decisions, and I'm all basing this on what Bioware has talked about, you will have to suffer consequences. There's no decision that apparently, according to them, there's no decision that lets you get off scot-free. It's so if you choose to help the village, you might get that village's gratitude, and it might be a decent base of operations for activity X. But then activity Y is closed down. But that doesn't mean, the game still continues. So you really have to make choices, and you make those choices in the full knowledge that you are probably going to exclude, for lack of a better word, content from yourself in making those choices. But we'll have to wait and see. It just that sounds very good. It adds a sense of realism. Now, briefly, I'm totally not interested in the romance stuff. Never really interested me. But we'll see how that's handled. Once again, I think it'd be a bit unrealistic to make everyone bisexual. But giving the politically correct route that Bioware has been going down the whole time, I assume that's what they're going to do. Once again, I have no problem with bisexuality, heterosexuality, whatever. It just doesn't interest any of it. But that's a bit unrealistic. I'm sure people, Bioware forums, as you know, Bioware sociopathy forums, they have huge romance sections that have been at the time shut down because of the intensity of people's arguments there. Never really got into myself. I'm much more about the story itself and the game mechanics. That's always been my big shtick. So it looks pretty promising. I'm already thinking about what kind of character I'll start the game off of. Everyone's saying they're going to start with Kunari, so I guess Stardust won't. I hate just doing it like everyone else. I'm not sure. But I'm not going to play human, though. Maybe a dwarf, like the underdogs. We'll see. But those are some of the things that they've mentioned. And some other things, such as certain areas need real planning to even get access to, like rifts opening up over the waterways, over a lake or the ocean or what have you. And these are things that you have to invest time and energy in. And of course, I wouldn't call it real-time strategy per se, but there are definitely elements that they've talked about that allude to the possibility. Well, not just allude. I mean, you part of your job as the High Inquisitor, apparently, the Inquisitor. I think you're the only one with the name, is to create points of strategic value, and you do that by taking forts from the enemy, turning them into usable resources, maybe some other resources as well. Maybe you'll find mineral resources, so on and so forth. And this builds up the Inquisition, the strength of the Inquisition, and of course your allies. Once again, party interaction is there, which I think is an important aspect of Dragon Age. So if you take one decision, a party might not like it, party member might not like it, and you really might have to suffer the consequences later. But on the other hand, someone else might like it. And so, this is classic Dragon Age. You can't please everyone. But rather than straitjacketing you into a role, I think the way they're describing it, it seems that this will add a lot of flavor to the game. I mean, for multiple playthroughs and things like that. Never mind builds. The builds, of course, like I said, I love game mechanics and strategy, magic, combat, things of that nature. So it really seems overall pretty promising. Looks can be deceptive. I'm pretty sure right now I'll probably pre-order it as soon as I can get my Origin thing working again. But that's not a promise to you or to myself. Many people, justifiably so and understandably so, were so disappointed by Dragon Fecal Matter 2 that they just said, I'm done. And then, of course, Mass Effect 3 single player came out, and it was an abomination. Not just because of the ending, and I'm not going to go into that. It just overall was not a great title, I think. So, we'll see. We'll see how that works out. But I'm definitely overall looking forward to it, and more than likely than not, I'll pre-order it, assuming all necessary variables, and see how that goes. Some things they've talked about is putting the scare back in things like blood magic, which kind of just was trivialized in the last game quite a bit. There just was no scare effect there. And maybe we'll find out about some of the events, the coming events, that were based on older events in Dragon Age Origins, which, range anywhere from Morrigan's ritual, for those of you who may or may not know, to the Warden's decision, and I can't go into all of that right now. I'm assuming have knowledge of Dragon Age, or if not, I would suggest you play Dragon Age Origins, the first one. Very good game. But everything else, not Dragon Age 2. Yeah, so it looks pretty promising overall. I think they put a lot of effort in. I think they've invested the time. I think EA has really been put on the fence with not allowing Bioware. This is my assumption. I'm giving the benefit of the doubt to Bioware that EA is just putting so much pressure on them to pump titles out, because EA, they care just about profits, but maybe they're realizing that you have to put the energy and the time in order to reap a profit, to make a game good. Because the fan reactions, you had Dragon Age 2, then Mass Effect 3, and it was just downhill from there. So hopefully the Dragon Age franchise will continue in a positive light, and with mostly improvements. Now, like I said, I'm a little bit worried about the flashy combat. That's not how I would describe Nid or Grid. I prefer a system more similar to Skyrim. You don't have this flashy, these basically anime swings and stuff that you can see, and I'd prefer to avoid that if possible. But we'll see what happens. But I'm keeping it on my radar. It's a year hence, autumn 2014. So, Aniv. Probably first thing I'll be doing an entire LP at least one, of just probably blind. I'll probably pre-order it over Origin, as much as I despise Origin. And yeah, and as soon as I get in the game more, expect Stardust build guides for different setups. Because that's what I was all about for Mass Effect multiplayer. Those of you who are still around watching my videos from Mass Effect multiplayer, I think most people migrated, but I was the build guy. So yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching. I think this is going to be the first in a series of occasional informal talks on various game titles that are of interest to me. And yeah, we'll talk soon, or interact soon somehow with Google+. Take care.